and welcome to Varn. And today I'm here with Victor, who is a researcher, economist, and founder of several blockchain projects, including Humanode IO. We're here to talk about the future of the economy with all the changes coming from these technologies and what could be done differently with them. Humanode is itself kind of a more radical experiment in using blockchain in a different way than we often associate it with traditional crypto coin mining, although I'm sure that's part of it. So, Victor, what are some of the key changes you see developing in the new tech and economic landscape that seems to be really disruptive to people? I've done a lot more interviews as of late with various people on various sides of these developments, and they're kind of hard to get a handle on. So what do you see coming, immediately from your position in the field?
Immediately, it's a very long process, really. Crypto is mostly about speculation now. It's the main use case of crypto. So most of the systems we have in terms of governance and structures are purely plutocratic, oligarchic, capitalistic structures where the more money you have, the more power you have. And, our world is far, far beyond that. We probably had it 500 years ago, So to be honest, what crypto is giving us is still the same things that it gave us a few years ago, which is like fast international transfers, which is also less of a risk of a bank run, but you have the risk of smart contracts. In terms of financial system, people won't even notice crypto. It will be just somewhere in the back end. I really see the value, of crypto in terms of traditional finance in moving from the legacy financial system we have right now, which is pretty slow. If you heard about the thing called T+2, when you have to wait for 2 days for the international transfer, even between the banks and other structures, it's crazy inefficient, and it actually sometimes becomes a reason for a failure of banks. And once we move the real financial infrastructure we have, like the Eurodollar system and all these things, to faster blockchain-based or decentralized technology-based things, shouldn't be actually blockchain, for sure, then it would solve some of the problems we have, for sure. So, but yeah, immediately, I don't see many things, changing thanks to crypto in the world. It's just a better financial infrastructure, to be honest. There are some cool experiments, but yeah, we can discuss them later.
Well, I think for most people, crypto is just a speculation asset. It's not even a real, like, crypto coins they're kind of a currency, but kind of not in how they actually function. They're way too deflationary to be useful for daily purchasing.
Exactly. Yes, the currency that we use, it should be inflationary. Otherwise, we'll ruin our businesses. Otherwise, when we have deflation, it's a recession right away. Okay, endless recession.
Yeah, and I'm glad you kind of realized that there was. I remember the early days of the use of blockchain technology, which now is almost 20 years ago, but it came out of very specific gold bug related economics that was, to put it mildly, a somewhat delusional about like why we should have an economy based on 18th and 19th century deflationary commodity production. But what I found interesting when I started looking into blockchain, and we're, for those of you who are wondering, we're not gonna be just talking about blockchain. There's a lot of technological developments that tie into this, but that it was actually very interesting set of decentralized technologies that we were only using for one thing. And I have been very interested in the way technologies that are interesting, would be helpful to humans under certain conditions, are currently kind of deleterious to humans because they are limited on path dependencies that have something to do with systems that existed before they were developed. And you kind of hinted at it. We have a very, in some ways, a lot of the people using this tech don't just have a very old mode of thinking about economics. They have
Exactly.
a
The problem is
very
almost nobody knows economics. This is
Mhm,
the real problem. Uh, I mean, we are still living in the world where the whole academia is based on neoclassical economics. Most of it is complete bullshit, like delusional. It doesn't reflect the real world. You cannot
mhm.
model real world using it. It only makes the things worse. Some people say that it's better if we didn't have neoclassical economists at all for the last 100 years because they're just making things worse compared to how economy could function on its own. You cannot have cars without engineers, but you can have economy without economists. And of course, uh, yeah, many people delusional about money as well, right? Of course, we can call both, let's say, Bitcoin, any other asset which has a hard cap on its issuance, money. And at the same time, we can call our fiat money money. But these are kind of different money because if you look at the function of money, you have things like unit of account, right? You have things like store of value, and you also have things like means of exchange. And well, we figured out that you can have both means of exchange and store of value, because if you have a good store of value, it's a bad means of exchange because you live in a deflationary economy and it is the worst thing ever. And if you have a good means of exchange, it can be good store of value because it has to inflate. Okay.
Mhm.
And I feel like few people understand this. So in my opinion, crypto assets, we can consider them assets.
Mhm.
Some of them even work almost like just the stocks, right? They accumulate revenue, distribute this revenue, or just burn this revenue so that the average asset value goes up because it's less asset right now. And some of them have completely crazy token economies, which are new, which sometimes are just completely new models of money ever created. I can tell you more about recent experiments we had. But again, I would say it's all very speculative plus experimental. When we're going to use some of these new models in real world, well, just tokenization of real world assets to make them tradable 24/7. And yeah, moving from the legacy, let's say, code and spreadsheets of the current euro dollar fiat system.
Right. I mean, it does seem that the world economy, for reasons that are geopolitical and maybe technological as well, is becoming less and less trusting of let's say, dominant series of forex national fiat currencies that most countries need to gain access to uh, any number of markets. Or when I say countries, I mean both their states and firms within those states. Um, but experiments to use something like crypto to fix that, and there have been some small Latin American nations in particular that have flirted with that. Don't seem to have been particularly helpful for the reasons that you say. Like, what, if you think the US dollar is bad about something that you need to get access to the international market, a highly deflationary asset is gonna be worse when you need to purchase things, and you have a very weak basis in your own country, in terms of production to get that asset. um
You cannot export because your asset is very valuable, and the U.S. economy is kind of in the trap of having the world currency
mhm,
when other countries can basically, well, make the price of dollar go up, and you as a country want it to go down, but you're already reserve currency, so it's a tricky situation, right?
yeah, absolutely. um but I've been also wondering about the way things like innovations in LLM uh, based artificial intelligence and stuff might start to change this. And one of the things that I try to be specific when I talk about AI is, one, LLMs aren't entirely new, and two, they're not the only form of AI. In fact, there's all kinds of things, some of which actually a little bit frighten me, like the biocomputer networks, which are based off of human brain cells and stuff like that.
Oh, you mean
So,
neuromorphic computers? Yeah, when
right.
you create brain cells in the lab, and yeah, they're actually very efficient for some kinds of, I mean, computation. Yeah.
Well, it makes sense because their neural networks act a lot more like human ones for obvious reasons. Um, and I don't think these technologies are actually well understood in the general public as even existing, because people aren't following this space, or they're following just the obvious things in this space, like Chat GPT, our current tech oligarchs' flirtations with government. I think in the last week, for example, a lot of the AI, like 4 AI CEOs, got made lieutenant colonels, which is like a step under general, with no prior military experience in the United States, because they're being integrated as some part of a strategic military intelligence asset. And conversely, on the left, there are those who think that LLM based AI is mostly a scam, and it's energy inputs to outputs uh, make it unviable in the long term. It's not profitable. Um, uh, Blah blah blah. I think um, Ed Citron is probably the most famous person pushing that view. Um, and uh, I find that when I think about that in combination with blockchain, I see something that could be incredibly helpful for the world, or something that could be, nearly ending disastrous, in the way that, say, the development of nuclear weapons and nuclear energy was a similar kind of technology, that had massive implications. Um, how do you see these blockchain developments interfacing with these developments in AI? And then we'll talk about some of the other things I mentioned in this question.
Sure, sure. Well, there is a lot to it. Okay.
Hmm.
So, first of all, um, many people think that AI should not be, and all the data, when you talk to LLM, let's say, should not be in the hands of these corporations. So,
Hmm.
there are many, many blockchain projects who get the most funding now, who just make decentralized AI computations to make sure that these computations are, so to say, belong to nobody. Nobody can see them. And your AI conversations are truly yours, even if you don't run them locally on your PC, which is, you have to have a really good one for that. On the other hand, we had a wave of AI agents launching in the crypto space. Of course, it was most speculation, but there were some interesting examples. And basically, uh, it's not only about LLMs, okay, not only about those AIs who post on Twitter, but it's also about AIs who can, well, basically not only have their own character, but also trade, and people can follow their trades and they can earn fees from that. And we're talking about like autonomous AI, let's say, who can place bets on prediction markets, right? And then this AI can actually hire people if, for example, he needs to connect to the API of, let's say, TradingView. And it can be really autonomous. It can be really fun. I won't say these AI agents that are actually trading stuff is a bad thing, because they increase the velocity of our money, right? They increase the number of transactions in the economy. And then there is a like third aspect of AI blockchain intersection, which is the governance of AI. Okay, so imagine we create. It won't happen during the next few years, I think. we're overestimating the basically the becoming of general artificial intelligence, which is someone a little bit smarter than one human, and especially super intelligence, which is smarter than all the humans in the world. But when he comes, do we want him to be controlled by the government? Do we want her to be controlled by a private company, or we want to have some kind of coordination mechanism between the humans in the world that would allow us to update it or even to shut it down? And this is something, this is the intersection of what we do in Humanode, creating like one human, one vote governance systems, where we can prove that the person is real and unique through biometrics without knowing who the person is, and basically then put under governance some code updates, even treasury management, which is like money management, let's say, of the communities. And it can also be used to basically control these more autonomous AI agents or even general artificial intelligence. Oh yeah, and there is of course a fourth aspect of it that you probably want to talk later, which is when the general artificial intelligence comes and people are really out of their jobs, but there is economic prosperity. How are we going to structure our economic systems?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, that latter question is something I think a lot about, and we will come to that. But I want to focus in on some of the first bits there. One, so I used to be more like Ed Citron as a skeptic of the possibility of general artificial intelligence. I am less so now. Um, One of the things is I think there's a little bit too much focus on what large language model AIs do, and not enough focus on other kinds of AIs when people talk
Exactly.
about
This is right. I don't believe LLMs can become general artificial intelligence. It will be some kind of other model. Yeah.
Mm. But that does worry me. I mean, like the context of where a general AI emerges is sort of, not just in a science fiction sense, although I do think sci-fi writers thought a lot about this weirdly. It's important. So, for example, if a general AI is developed by private contractors for the U.S. military, um, we might have a real problem on our hands because that context is going to be the initial training data and the orientation of that AI. And I know historically that military sectors tend to push this kind of development. I was actually thinking one of the things about a lot of the current AIs is, um, while there is of course government investment in them and there's a lot of military uses in GEM, it's actually one of the few modern technologies developed in the last say 70 years that actually primarily doesn't come out of the defense world explicitly. Um, Blockchain kind of being another one. But if you look at the history of most 20th century technology, there's a big misconception amongst the American general public, and it's probably relatively true in Europe, that private industry invented most of them. But when you actually look at it, it's like, no, a lot of this stuff came out of defense development and then was later on.
Yeah. Some people believe that all the things we have, like all the best technologies we have, they are also coming from the military, but they're just not putting it out there, this information. But they kind of chose a person to run this company, let's say, and gave the person the technology. But it sounds like I don't know, conspiracy theory, to be honest.
Yeah. Um, I was gonna. There's another interesting implication in your last statement that I want to tease out a bit, because people will freak out when you talk about private corporations running all this data. Um, I think a lot of left-wing thinkers, however, aren't as concerned about a nation running this data and national governance. And I think they really should be, and you seem to too, because of course, like for example, if it's primarily the U.S. government who has, you know, a super intelligent general AI, um, they're going to leverage that in geopolitics in a way that may not be good for the world or even people in the United States, because it will probably be in parts of the government where there is very little democratic control. And I know that people think America is a democracy, but the trend of the last 150 years is to remove more and more of the running of government outside of democratic inputs. This is also a trend in the last 50 or 60 years in the EU. And it seems like you are very much thinking about the problems this poses to the general economy and to developments of technologies if these become basically monopolies of a single government, which may or may not be responsive to its own democratic pressures, but definitely doesn't consider the world as a democratic input. Yeah.
Well,
So I guess
we
go
basically try to build technologies that eventually even governments could use,
ahead.
if they are truly democratic. Because people can come out of the streets and say, hey guys, this is not a democracy, but we have this technology working for thousands of people, not on a national level, but in the internet, the coordination technology to make, let's say, uh, more independent communities in terms of they're not told by federal government what kind of lessons should they teach in the school, what kind of buildings should they build for the community. And yeah, I'm kind of hopefully governments will use this transparent technology, because blockchain is all about transparency. It's less about privacy, but we also have privacy aspects there. And if you have more transparency, if the citizens see it, and you can also verify that the votes are legit, then you can pretty much have direct democracy where people vote on everything themselves without representatives who kind of are the middlemen, of people and the state. And this
Mm-hmm.
middlemen make us less democratic, because it's a very strange thing to choose one person for 4 years, I would say, especially if you talk about, well, maybe not the country, but some kind of professional aspect. And in 4 years, people change. They can become influenced by other people that you don't like. Why can't you change your vote right away? And on the other side, why do you vote for people when you could vote directly for the proposals? So these are kind of things we're doing with our governance of blockchain, like liquid democracy. With delegation, you can change anytime, or direct voting, making sure one person actually casted just one vote
Mm-hmm.
without casting 100 votes through some means, because we can biometrically verify that this person already voted, so his other votes won't count. So there are many things how we could make the governments better, but of course these changes can be imposed on the governments only when, like, the people rise up a little bit.
Yeah. This is actually an important thing about democracy, though, because you get to, in a way, a social technology that representation historically was trying to deal with was complete scaling up beyond traditional communities where you could have a small R. And for my American listeners, Republican discourse within the community. You had representatives who had a fairly low remove from who they were representing. They could get beat up by them, for example. If they Now we have even with representatives, we have a super high remove, in some ways higher than even like early medieval kings to their subjects. And that's for people who are democratically elected. Let's just assume legitly. We don't have to posit any conspiracies here, but who are they going to be beholden to? What they're going to be beholden to, who can empower them to run again and maintain their power base, which is going to almost necessarily be oligarchical. Um, and when you read, say, Aristotle writing on this or something, it does seem like a natural limit. What I started getting, even before I was aware of like current innovations in blockchain and how this could be used, um, I was just thinking about like general systems theory and 1940s, 1950s lever cybernetics, and going, well, this is representation was actually a technological problem in some ways. It's a way of, we needed to figure out a better way to organize how to verify things and who does what. And And
This is true. This is true. I mean, we don't yet have the technology to make communism happen because what we had was not real communism, and we still don't have enough technology to coordinate on this level. I think to have real one, and yeah, and well, to start communism, you have to end with to come to the end of capitalism first, of course.
right. Well, I mean, this is a weirdly Marxian point, but I think it actually is interesting that Marx always would talk about how capitalism created the technologies for its own undoing, and it kept on pushing further back when that was going to happen. Admittedly, but uh, I've been thinking a lot about the implications of things like blockchain plus a very advanced AI, and I'm like, well, that would destroy. Like, it would create a highly prosperous economy that would have also massive unemployment, because that's the only way that stuff is actually super profitable, which would be so social destabilizing that there's a lot of stuff that comes from that, but also um, that it really is a technology that enables things like direct democracy, uh, humans, not that
Redistribution of wealth as
yeah,
well.
exactly. Yeah. And right now it is being used for redistribution of wealth, just all upwards. So
There are some
uh
lucky ones. There are some lucky ones, but 0.001%.
mhm.
The
um
retail usually comes in the last 3 months of the bull run and then loses money over the course of the next 3 months when it already falls down. So that's what happens. Yeah. I'm talking about the different kind of redistribution. So, for instance, yeah,
mhm,
it is all interconnected. Yeah, with AI and stuff, and the fact that uh, even with not maybe general AI, but hundreds, thousands of AI agents. Okay,
mhm,
so let's say they do need blockchains to transact money, right? And this is the perfect thing for them. It's very easy for them to control a wallet. It's really hard for AI to control a bank account. They won't open it up, right? And every time you do anything on the blockchain, you pay a fee, right?
mhm,
So imagine there is like a swarm of these AIs paying the fee to the blockchains. So now the only question which is left, where these fees go. In the current structure of blockchains we have, like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and hundreds of others, the fees go to the biggest validators, the ones who, well, just own a huge part of the network by holding the tokens or mining equipment. And on the other hand, well, this sounds like dystopian future, right? You have AI agents always putting money in the pockets of the rich controlling the blockchains. And on the other hand, with what we do with Humanode, it can look like a bright future because you have thousands of AI agents doing transactions every day, and then the fee can be distributed equally to all the humans who actually, well, who hold the infrastructure of this blockchain, who launch these servers. And imagine even, well, you can have a country where let's say you have banks, but they're all connected to the same blockchain ledger. And the fees are not going into bankers' pockets to pay for their cool lifestyle, but the fees are distributed equally among all the citizens of the country. And the citizens, they don't just sit, they really contribute because each citizen proves he's unique human and also holds the server, which holds the history of the whole financial system of the country. And that's why they receive their fees, which can be your UBI, but it's
mhm,
not really UBI because UBI is almost money for nothing. It's money for something. you know and this is how we can basically redistribute the flows of wealth in the financial system to the people. Yeah, and it can work pretty fine, to be honest.
mm. I think this actually, I mean, this brings up one of the issues that a lot of left-wing thinkers have with technology, that they also weirdly cannot imagine a lot of times another use case for technology than the one that they're currently given under these current capitalist rules, which, you know, in some ways fair enough. It is hard to think outside of the ideology of the dominant paradigm you live in, even if that ideology, as we said, based on neoclassical economics,
Well, depends when you were born and educated in. You know,
yeah, very much so.
for the West, it's very hard. I know.
Why? I mean, why do you think this has been so hard to, even certain things like, let's just say, basic insights from modern monetary theory and neo-chartalism? It's hard to get through to people, even though they live, um, they live in that world on a daily basis. So for example, like, people really seem to think that there is somehow a finite amount of paper currency, and that paper currency is limited by something, although they know it's no longer gold or some hard commodity. But when you ask them, like, well, what backs your money, if you think it's finite like this, they can't tell you. You know, they might think it's oil sometimes, if you get a slightly smarter person in America or Europe. Mostly, I'm going to talk more for America here. Europeans are usually a little bit better on this stuff, but I find that maddening because, and it's even true for some leftists, because they basically act like we live in a commodity economy of the 17th and 18th century, where there was no state strong enough to compel trade, and thus, you know, interstate commerce needed to be an agreed upon commodity that was fairly hard. But we've already talked about the contradictions of that, even the, you know, just two of them, which is money as a store of value and money as a store of liquidity. You can't be good at both. So it, these kinds of things just uh don't occur to people, and that's just in terms of currency and money. That's not even in terms of larger political things. Because I've asked people, for example, um there's been an assumption in a lot of people I talk to, even a lot of very smart people here in the US who are technologically literate, um that, well, all innovation will lead to more jobs, or all innovation takes away from jobs. And they just have a very, like, binary, one of those two binaries is like people's general assumption. Either you're creating jobs because the new tech creates all kinds of new jobs. That's the kind of positive, optimistic.
It's you know, it's not the car that will take your job. It will be the horse who learns how to drive the car.
Yeah, exactly. That's actually a good point. Um, and I am interested in what you're talking about, because I think the idea of a truly human intelligent AI actually I mean, in addition to opening up all kinds of ethical questions that I haven't even begun to wrap my head around, um, it really does lead to a way for people, if they could control it, to have workers that you can totally control and also don't really have to pay. And by workers, I mean basically robots. If they're super intelligent, also they're more efficient than people, and if you can get their energy costs down, which is a concern. But again, one of the things about, if you had a truly super intelligent AI, uh and you start asking it to figure out its own efficiency um mechanisms, it probably would. So then even the energy cost mode, unless it's a true physical limitation, would be something that could be handled. And all of a sudden, you know, the singularity talk from 20 years ago doesn't seem as far-fetched. And so it does, to me, matter how we have these technologies distributed and how we can have inputs. And one of the things you're talking about is this, like, one person, one node, you know, input system, which you could use blockchain for. You could have, a governance of this that is truly world democratic, and I actually emphasize that on purpose. Um, we can have a massive scramble between nation states and private companies that'll probably lead to a lot of wars and a lot of immiserated people and a lot of social instability. And I can tell you what it seems like. You know, a lot of people are accidentally choosing right now, but I also think it's important that we not limit ourselves to that dystopian imagination about this stuff, that there really is something socially emancipatory about some of this technology, just kind of like there was over the internet. I think the internet to me is like kind of the prior case model to look at, because until we started seeing the gobbling up of lots of space, and I don't just mean net space, I also mean physical server space. There's always a physical infrastructure to the surface that people don't think about, but um there was actually kind of a liberatory element to the internet that a lot of people just don't see anymore, because they experience a very cartel internet that's increasingly subject to power law dynamics, that also is becoming a major site of international geopolitical competition.
It's the same with Bitcoin now. Completely
Yeah.
the same happened already. So cartelized. Uh, it's not anti-politics anymore. Every good news comes from political events. Any bad news comes from political events. It was not supposed to be like that 10 years ago.
Mm.
Same with the internet. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and we've already seen, a lot of, in America, there was an assumption that, the tech overlords, while they may be rentiers and not super great, they were probably at least aligned to culturally progressive values. As of the last few years, that seems pretty clearly no longer the case, if it was ever actually true, and I actually kind of doubt it was ever true. But again, and I want you to speak to this a little bit, is I think people conflate that with the tech itself. That because of these people who control this tech, because of how they're using this tech, they assume that the tech itself is inherently bad, and not that it's a case of like, no, it's been captured, like the internet was captured, and it's been captured for specific reasons, and yes, people are using it in a particularly vicious capitalistic way, but that's not inherent to the device, any more than like, I don't know. I guess the metaphor would be like that agriculture is inherent to feudalism or something. It's just not exact. Like, you have to kind of break those things as two separate things when you talk about tech. The use case currently and the potential use case are very different. So I wanted to ask you, like, however, how do we get that? Like, how do we start seeing moving people to think about different use cases than the dystopian ones they're currently seeing?
That's a wonderful question. How do we make people think at all? Like, it's our interconnected things. Yeah. Oh my God! Just showing him what else is possible. I mean, that's it. That's what we're trying to do. It's
Mm,
actually harder to do when you're trying to do less dystopian plutocratic things, because capitalists support you less. I mean, the rich ones, because that's
mhm,
not their game. They are used to play, and well, there are just a lot of people, as we've seen, also like Peter Thiel. He discovered that for some reason, 70% of millennials, yeah, the generation that will, let's say, rule the world in the next 10, 20 years, are very socialist compared to those baby boomers who love capitalism so much because it gave them everything they have, right? Before that,
mm,
there was almost nothing. And there are more and more people who are, well, who understand that the world we have right now, it's not exactly the structure, the economic structure we want to live in the future, not exactly the world we want our kids to live in the future. So we experiment more and more, and that's the main thing. For instance, okay, another example is taking the speculation and turning it into a good thing. Uh, we had this wave of meme coins. Okay, people went crazy. 99.99% lost their money on meaningless, useless meme coins. But what if you, uh, for example, have the same kind of volatility, but for the hypothesis tokens, which represent scientific hypotheses? Let's say you make bets on this scientific hypothesis, you earn money, you lose money as a speculator, but the fees go to actually people who do the scientific research. And then boom, you have the same fun thing when you can speculate, win and lose money, but now it has positive externalities. Okay, and you're kind of turning capitalism crazy speculation wheel into something good in the end. Even if people lost money, they helped the science a little bit by doing that. And how do we make people do things differently? That's a nice question. I mean, it always comes down to education, I suppose. Just uh, different education in different states would be awesome. So that we could experiment with education as well, and then figure out the best, who was the best state in the end, and adapt new guidelines, not the ones that we have for the whole countries that never change in the course of 10, 20 years. I mean, you just asked the most difficult question that I heard in the last year.
I mean, I do think of this a lot about like education, because again, I think a lot about North American leftist, and they don't think about education that much anymore. They've been sold a bunch of stuff by neoliberals about education that weren't true. So they then think, well, we can't fix anything with education. But I'm always like, well, not that I think the Soviet system was ideal, I don't, but there's a reason why they invested so much in their schooling and actually were pretty successful at that early on. And so that's not just like a liberal assumption that we don't need to educate people. However, I work as a teacher as my day job in addition to doing this, and you want to talk about something stuck in old path dependencies, and even the reformers who like complain about the industrial model of education, they're stuck in a 1970s market model that's still fairly standard. And I haven't seen, I mean, right now it doesn't seem like there's all that much interest in political spaces about innovating education at all. I mean, in the United States, and to a lesser degree in Great Britain and France, you've seen educational entropy and decay, and also like the cultural norms that of the 1950s or whatever are basically still kind of assumed, even when they reform the standards. We're still talking about like a set of I work a lot in literature, so a set of cultural texts that were very specific to like pre-World War II, post-World War II national identities that really aren't relevant to that many people anymore. And when you go to change that, what you get is often even worse. Like you get people who just become hypersensorious, or I mean, in this country, that's become a major problem. Or uh, they want to replace something bad with basically nothing at all. And there's also these assumptions about students, particularly around technology. So I work particularly in a virtual I hate that word actually for this job, but a virtual environment for a public school. It's not a private school. And we have tons of issues with even like like on one hand, we have legislatures who want us to be more technologically literate. On the other hand, they want so much control over information that most technology we actually can't use. And then we have this uh archaic state by state regulation. And I know, for a far leftist, it's weird for me complaining about archaic regulations, but it is true that they are, where we need private consortiums to sort out the regulations because no government agency is willing to do it, which also means that the democratic input for how to handle these democratic, and for those of you who are listening, not watching, both of those are in scare quotes, regulations becomes nearly impossible to do. This is why I started thinking about something like your one person, one node issue, because we really aren't that responsive to our communities by the legislature. In fact, the legislature has its own agenda. And like, even though a lot of the stuff is sold to Americans in particular under the auspice of local government, this stuff is written in think tanks in New York City and in California and at Sanford and stuff like that, not at all locally, even though local politicians are pushing them for whatever reason. And so
Well,
you
my
have,
American friends believe it's going to change very soon. Yeah. It's going to be
oh,
better. Like communities will actually have a voice over, like, even educational systems they choose, at least in US, and that everybody will follow. But it sounds very good. Hope so.
you 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 say this, you sound a little skeptical about that. Why?
Why? Well, I'm over 30. I'm very skeptical about things right now.
Yeah. Um, I mean, there's a lot of focus. I mean, uh, having briefly lived in Europe many years ago, I mean, 8 months, almost 20 years ago, I don't think has any real expertise today. But I did find that there's just an assumption that American education is quite bad. True, actually, but that was used to cover up that, like, the main European countries' education was actually, when you looked at even the PISA scores, was only slightly better. Like Britain, France, and I mean Germany did a fair amount better, but Britain and France were just barely above us.
What about
So
Finland? What about Sweden? It's,
those are great. Those
yeah.
are great, but you know, why are they great? Um, and I actually I'm interested in that because, I mean, you mentioned Sweden. Sweden has a model that confounds both the American left and right wing. It has a lot of choice, but it also has a lot of government support. And the idea that you could have both, I mean, like,
Yeah, it should be like that for sure. For sure. I mean, government support of education is
mhm,
no brainer. Is no brainer. Yeah, I think if you fund schools and if you fund teachers, you're not going to have inflation. You know, the only
mm,
reason why we don't print a lot of money for everything we need is because we're afraid of inflation. But if you do the thing, spend the money right, you can actually fund a lot of public stuff without ruining your economy, but only making it better. And healthcare and education are two of those things.
well, yeah, I mean, healthcare and education are interesting because even under a neoclassical model, they present a huge problem for neoclassical economics. I mean,
Anything is a problem for neoclassical guys because it doesn't work.
yeah, well, yeah, I mean, my favorite joke, but I'm actually not really joking, is the neoclassical versions of information, uh, equilibrium, require the abolition of time, um, to
Exactly.
be true.
Exactly.
And it's like, yeah, that seems something very crucial to leave out of your model, that we exist in a temporal world where perfect information symmetry is
With
kind of
information,
impossible. Go ahead.
rational people, yeah, no
Mhm.
time, and equilibrium. These things just bizarre, you know.
Yeah.
We're living in a complex evolutionary system with time. That's why we need to build dynamic models, not this supply and demand bullshit. And at the same time, we're living in a world which never comes to equilibrium, because even you have a system with three things influencing each other, that's it. You will probably never reach an equilibrium. Yeah.
Well, this is actually interesting because one, there's two faulty assumptions that most people make here, and I know you know this, but this is from my audience. Um, that the more you move towards nominal this nominal idea of equilibrium, even if you don't get there, that there's like somehow an assumption that you get that much more efficient marketly. That's a logical fallacy. There's no reason to assume that. Actually, there's no reason to assume that every investment towards this uh, um, information equilibrium would lead to that in equal manner. In fact, there's all kinds of reasons to think that it may not. And two, that that rationality is basically circular for for neoclassicals and neoliberals too. That basically we know something is rational because it's an expression of your wants. We know it is an expression of your wants because you get it. Therefore, anything you do would be according to this model rational. That's perfectly circular. It says nothing. Like I don't know what rationality means if it's just always what you choose to do.
See,
Um,
well,
but
in terms of economics, it's very simple. You go to the shop, right,
mhm.
and you do the comparison of all the goods between each other, which is computationally so hardcore that you would need a few supercomputers and probably a nuclear power plant to do it just in one shop. You know, the comparison of products, all of them between each other, to find the optimal basket of products in this shop. This is crazy. Humans don't work like that. In fact, humans can't even take a decision without having any feelings. You heard about
Mhm.
people who were like their brains were a little bit like cut inside, and
Mhm.
basically their rational part of the brain, let's say, didn't talk to the emotional part of the brain. You know what? They couldn't take any decision at all, just without emotions. It seems impossible for us humans.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, just to think about this, how do you choose between, say, if you don't have an allergy or something, let's just say apple preserves and apricot preserves. What's the rational calculus that's going to that you could possibly make about that without any emotional input? And I don't think there is one. I mean, maybe you'd be like, well, apples are easier to produce than apricot. Although, how would you know that? Like, how would you know which one's easier to produce, which one's better to the environment? The level of complexity of just that simple um binary choice without an emotive input is basically, a human being just would not choose. They wouldn't know how to choose. It would lead to choice paralysis almost instantly. And I just find this maddening when people talk about people this way. And I agree. I mean, um, I think it's important that people understand that, particularly when we talk about stuff like more advanced tech, like when we're talking about like rational optimization of AI use. And I'm like, I don't entirely know what you mean by that. Like if you pass that out, like what would be the like Pareto optimism of optimization of AI? I have no idea, and I don't know that anyone does either. Um so I like this idea that maybe we should just I tend to be an optimist about people in one sense that if you get a bunch of people together and they have some mild level of risk and they make the decisions directly and don't have some proxy for them, there tends to be a fairly decent answer from a large number of people. Any individual can be an idiot. Any expert actually can be an idiot on things they don't have
Yeah.
expertise on. And a large group washes that out. Like it equals out. You start seeing choices that are even better than singular experts. Um and uh I find this interesting, and I also find that like tech oligarchs are terrified by this because a lot of them have been moving away from this idea that they were a libertarian technology. I mean, like Thiel basically wants some bizarre form of feudalism that is similar to what Curtis Yarvin or Hans Hermann Hoppe or these, kind of ghouls want. And to me, I think about the potential liberatory nature of us being able to identify things, to tie them into individual people, so we can be sure that that like voting and inputs are honest. That we could reduce cognitive load for things and have people, instead of becoming potatoes, which they're probably going to kind of become under the current system, free themselves up to think about other things and use this technology to think more efficiently. Because I've read studies about exposure to LLM AIs that make people dumb, and I'm like, and I kind of believe that, but I believe the research, but I'm also like, but that's because the way we're using it. Like, you can use this well, or you can use this like you think Google works, which Google didn't work that way either, to try to provide all the answers for you, or you can use it as a way to refine your own thought, as a way to mimic social thinking. Um, Most people don't know to even choose the mimic social thinking, which would make them smarter and more efficient in a lot of ways. Instead, they choose the individualist atomized option, which will actually atrophy their skills. And that's not inherent to the technology, that's inherent to the use case. And trying to get others to think that way is something that is why, like, I wanted to talk to you. And you're not normally like you said before we came on the air, this is not a crypto podcast. So why was I interested? And this is why. So, let's talk for a second. What you're experimenting with what could be done with this. What kind of things could we start to do with blockchain and AI and stuff together?
Well, by the way, speaking of the wisdom of the crowds, yes,
Mhm.
you just reminded me of one technology coming from crypto that actually works, and it's a very good signaling for the future events, which is the prediction markets.
Mhm.
They were in development since 2014, and finally 3 years ago, crypto guys got it right, and we got adoption beyond like crypto users. That's awesome. That rarely happens, I would say. And at the same time, you could have, of course, prediction market, which is based on how much money you put in, like, and then you change the percentage of the outcome. And then at the same time, you could just have signaling that we use, with one person, one vote. So uh, you have a company running, like you have a board of directors or you have a government, doesn't matter, but you can actually online put a vote. Yeah, do you guys want to do this or this, especially when you don't know yourself what the community wants? And you can have one person, one vote on any matter, for political signaling, or for, I don't know, corporate signaling from the employees, to see if the management is aligned with actually thousands of people working in the company. And yeah, this is or one of the things that we could use. Again, it's not exactly based on AI, but biometrics are also using neural networks, just not LLMs, but usually convolutional ones.
Hmm.
Mm, well, this is, again, yeah, this is something I work on. That's why it's easy for me to talk about it. What else can it be? I don't know. It can be AI proposing changes to people, like on a regular basis. For example, he's fed with the data of what happens in a certain region, and he's like, oh, I actually found this thing, maybe we can do it better this way. And then it's not just going as a paper on the table of the politician, but it's going through the signaling of the people, of the citizens living there, with one person, one vote, simply on the internet. Let's say if 1% of people participated, this is something you should take into account. Probably it was a good proposal. I'm sure there will be like emerging coordination of people and AI, because AI can check after us, it can propose some ideas, people can check after him, provide their own opinion, to have the wisdom of the crowd, not the hallucination of AI. And we can, yeah, do a lot of fun things like that with coordination.
Mm. One thing we've been kind of talking a little bit, and you brought it up earlier, is a universal basic income and some of the problems with our current conception of it. That we just give if you just untargetedly throw out money for nothing, and I'm putting that in quotation marks out there, yes, it would probably lead to, I wouldn't necessarily just say inflation, but all the kinds of problems that you have within hyper acceleration of the market under the current system. And I want to be very clear on that, because my prior critiques of UBI is not that I'm against UBI, but that if like you did UBI and left all class and production dynamics the same, it's probably going to be a problem. But one of the things that I just want to float to people, if we start having even relatively actually intelligent AI systems, that can innovate, not just repeat what humans have already done, I wouldn't even think it needs to be super intelligent. You're already in a scenario that is radically different than what we were in even 5 years ago. Um, which means we do have to respond to that if you don't want the entire planet to look a lot more like the favelas of Brazil. And you know, a more and more unstable uh uh economy, with, you know, people also still being able to benefit from the prosperity at a level we've never seen before, and, you know, human inequity being even unrecognizable to the most, you know, decadent kingships and empires of the past. But this is interesting, because one of the things that, if you think about, um, both a more diffuse democratic nature of interacting with government and production, and also adding to that, uh, ways in which people's interaction would actually, you know, profit the system, deliver science, as you mentioned earlier. This would not have those effects. Like UBI would have a fundamental different effect. It would actually be somewhat similar to just injecting targetedly injecting currency seen now, except the target isn't uh, a bunch of bankers at the Fed who just decide this for the entire planet, kind of at their own whim, which, you know, it leads to all kinds of problems. I mean, one of the things that you mentioned now is, being the universal reserve currency isn't even always great for the U.S. Even though it gives the U.S. a ton of power, it also means that, you know, they're effectively tied into dealing with government decisions of governments they have very little control over, which would also lead them to a more imperial stance over that. I mean, because, you know, all of a sudden, I don't know, what a banker in Indonesia decides can affect the U.S. economy, even if it's not a direct trade implication. And it does seem like right now we're kind of stuck in the U.S. in particular. I don't we're stuck in a weird world, where uh, we don't want to give it the power of being the reserve currency, but we're awful pissed off about the limitations that's put on us as far as the cost of our export, the ability to export, the way it plays on our own worker development, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and it leads to all kinds of political crises. I think the current Trump administration is app proof of that, but also app proof that they don't really have any way to deal with it. Because if you totally give up being the reserve currency, all kinds of American power goes away. But if you don't, you also are actually kind of held hostage domestically. And when people ask, like, oh, why doesn't China, very powerful country, largest producer, why don't they, try to be the universal forex, a country they produce the
Well,
most?
they are trying little by little with
Mhm.
different countries, like starting with Russia, and they are also caught up in this, debate. You can have both uh, great exports and reserve or the main forex currency.
Mm,
Yeah, it's it's also very difficult because the financial system we have right now, it's pretty much not under control of the central banks anymore.
yeah.
It's almost free from central banks because central banks control interest rates, but market interest rates are more important than the interest rates that the Fed tells there is. And at the same time, yes, Fed kind of can try and inject the money into the banks, but it doesn't mean that the banks are going to use this money. There is no such thing as a banking multiplicator anymore. Sometimes
Mhm.
you try to inject money and the multiplicator is below one, and it just works easily. If you have a banking license, every time you give out the loan, you create money. So pretty much anyone with a banking license can do that.
Yeah,
And it's out of the control.
yeah. Well, I mean, that does seem to explain why, like, Fed interest rate manipulation just doesn't seem to have the predicted response anymore. And
Yeah, it's just narrative signaling from the Fed, nothing else. And they are really afraid that they will now start reducing the rates. Nothing will change. And people will finally understand that there is no reason to follow Fed anymore because they have lost all of their power that they had once.
mm, well, I was gonna ask you about this because this has occurred to me in the context of the way diffuse economies work, but how many seemingly irrational government decisions are about masking that they no longer have control over a thing? Because it seems that there's a lot of that going on.
Well, I could say only for the central banks,
Okay.
they are either take decisions that destroy their economy or they are out of the control.
Mhm.
But I think all the other things like government spending are totally in control. Yeah, the only thing they can control, I mean, the things like inflation or, well, avoiding recession is by increasing government spending. But usually this is the decision not of the Fed, but of the Treasury. And
Mhm.
I mean, US is very lucky to have a smart Treasury Secretary right now. To be honest, because he's kind of saving the economy from what's happening right now by increasing the spending of the government.
Mm.
When you have,
Um.
yeah, the
Yeah.
thing is that when you have the private debt falling down, and
Mhm.
this is what we have right now, you usually have a recession. And in order to balance it out, you have to increase the government spending so that actually we have enough money flowing through the economy not to call it recession.
Yeah. I actually been interested in that because what the Treasury's been doing is very different in signaling than what, like, you know, the public neoliberal narrative that's being pushed by the same administration really is. I mean, like, you think about all the Doge stunts where you're firing people to save the government money.
Oh my God!
And
The actually the officials of the Treasury, they saved us from the narrative of Elon Musk, who doesn't know how money works, who doesn't know how financial system works. The government cannot go bankrupt. It can only uh, well end up with hyperinflation of the currency if the government money are distributed in the wrong way to push the prices up. But government cannot run out of money if it is a federal government and it is a money issuer, unlike,
right.
for example, like Ireland that use pound. Yeah.
Well, I mean, this is one of the interesting things is why, like, yeah, you know this. I just want to remind my my audience of this. Like, the EU would have currency sovereignty, except that the charter of the EU itself limits it. So to, I think, 3%. It
Yeah,
was, you
the
don't
EU is
compromise.
caught up in a situation where there are two paths. Okay, one path
Mhm,
is not only to have a common currency but have common debt, like U.S.
mhm,
states have, and
mhm.
this would be great union. Now you have real currency with real common debt, or it will fall apart. There are two ways. Like they can choose whatever they like.
Well, yeah, I've actually thought a lot about that. It does seem like they're kind of choosing to fall apart, but it's one of these issues. Like, I think a lot about uh and this is kind of deep history that in America is unknown, but Keynes's proposal of Bancor, which actually probably would have been
Oh yeah, that's an interesting one. It might work for US actually, because you can. You don't, well, in Bancor, pretty much you don't need to be a global reserve currency because you have Bancor.
Mm-hmm.
And Bancor also is supposed to balance out the import and exports. What
Mm-hmm.
US is now doing with tariffs could be just done with Bancor.
Mm-hmm. And well, I mean, it seems to be kind of like a world historical tragedy, particularly for the transatlantic money system, that Bancor was rejected. But I also understand the kind of game theoretical logic that led it to be rejected, because none of the states wanted to give up what they perceived as their own currency power. It's the same problem that you had in the creation of the EU and that 3% thing that you guys did, where basically the EU decided we're not going to have common debts, but we are going to have a common currency, and we're going to get around the common debt problem by this weird limitation of our own currency sovereignty, which benefits, actually it doesn't even benefit Germany anymore. It used to kind of, but like um at the current moment it seems to benefit nobody. It used to benefit Germany sort of, and maybe France. Um and I think, we just have to get out of this model. This model's been disastrous. It's been disastrous for the quote pig countries. It's I think actually it's leading to war in Eastern Europe. And weird stuff about currency zones and NATO and all this. It's always gotten Russia on edge. And I I do think one of the things that I think people need to kind of grasp from our conversation here is the way we choose to organize these technologies could actually have knock-on effects on things that doesn't seem to have knock-on effects to, like geopolitical competition. And I don't want to sound like an utter utopian, and I don't think the world's just magically going to all get along because we have something like a blockchain-based voting system. But I do think it would greatly change the way we make these kind of decisions in a way that would probably reduce tensions, because one thing I will say, the more information people have, usually the less likely their population is going to be willing to go to war and stuff like that, because they understand the cost of that. I mean, even here in the US, which is a country where we've been at kind of war almost constantly now for 50 years. um I say kind of war because it's not formally declared, blah blah blah, but there's been US military interactions that are effectively wars in the past 10 years that most US citizens don't even know happened. um and I think about like uh Americans finally realizing that we've been fighting the Houthis for 5 years, or learning that we were doing shenanigans in Africa, stuff like that. And uh, that information could be readily available, and those decisions could be uh, made more responsibly in a way that I do think would be even more conductive to world peace. Again, I'm not saying that there would never be conflict and violence. I'm not a utopian like this, but it would probably greatly reduce it. Um, and it's interesting, but that's, I think, precisely the reason why there's a lot of government investment in us not using this in ways that would be helpful. I don't know, what's your take on that? I mean, how do you deal with that?
Oh God, it's a difficult question. Yeah, I mean, I think about these proxy wars. I would say
Mm-hmm.
yes, as as a way to test the latest military equipment. You have to have at least one,
Mm.
because if you don't have it, you can lose to, well, other guys who wage wars and test their stuff. So this is a tricky thing for national security. There is no particular reason to wage wars outside of it for national security, but there it is at the same time, because the field tests, they don't help so much. So I think this is one of the reasons the guys like to wage wars. Also, it is a great way to destroy the value created in the world. which is kind of a deflationary process. Okay, so you do invest money, you do pay for people's jobs, you do pay for technological development, but in the end, you just throw these rockets and they're getting destroyed down to zero, you know. And this is a great way to control inflation and decrease the supply of the currency through this. So it's a very tricky question for me. I don't have an answer. Could we how could we structure our economy so that wars become unprofitable for everybody, you know, when they become the worst political decision ever, because they are sometimes, unfortunately, a good political decision. So I don't have an answer to that, to be honest.
Well, I mean, I think it's important that you point that out, because this is an insight from classical Marxism that I actually really hold to. That, like, when you start having an overproduction crisis, you can almost time that it's not guaranteed it's going to lead to war, particularly uh, in a direct way today because of the threat of nuclear weapons, but in indirect ways, it's like you're going to start seeing proxy wars pop off because you're doing massive production, you're injecting into the economy. You also bypass conservative instincts about injecting money into the economy. But you're just blowing that shit up, as you're saying. So you're not actually overproducing in the market in a way that'll lower prices. And it is an economically rational decision if you have inflation, or if you are um
You could actually do the same by investing in the teachers.
yeah, you could.
So more people earn money. There is no particular product created, but eventually people in your country are smarter, and in the long term, you have even bigger GDP, let's say. So I think that only the argument about the tests stands. I have no idea. Maybe we could just have a place where the countries could test their stuff with each other by killing each other without touching the people, you know. I don't know, just some kind of death games between the armies.
Yeah.
Just thinking out loud how to fix this awful part of our society, which seems important part of it we can't get rid of.
Yeah, it really is. Victor, we'll be going for about an hour and 20 minutes, and so I've really enjoyed our conversation. It's been very wide ranging. So
Same.
I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we'll talk about where people can find your stuff. But if you were going to tell people right now what area of technical development that people are not watching closely enough that they should be watching, where would you tell them to look?
Technical development.
Yeah, but technological development, social improvements. I use technical for a particular reason, but yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, there is one science that is the most, I would say, retarded and underdeveloped,
Mm-hmm.
like no other science, and this is called economics, macroeconomics. So if
Mm.
you pay more attention to these and know how it actually works, well, the world would be a much better place. We can solve so many problems with just, I don't know, having money out of thin air, you know, by government spending. And in terms of technology, that's a great question, because I'm also kind of following mostly mainstream stuff, using crypto a lot, using LLMs. But, well, new interfaces are also, everybody knows about them already.
Mm-hmm.
They're not yet there for mass consumption, because if they're accurate, they're highly invasive, and people are not ready for that yet. Then I would say the most underrated is probably genetic engineering, because it's prohibited in so many countries, but there are some countries who don't prohibit it, and they're going to have better humans in the next 20 years compared to the countries who prohibit, like, genetic engineering on humans. Because I think that we are now looking a lot into technological path of evolution, but not the biological path of evolution, because we can change biology with technology. We don't have to have wires everywhere and hardware everywhere, because we can change the, well, genes and other things. So I would say the combination of biological change and like hardware technological change, this is what Stanislav Lem talked a lot about in his pretty crazily written book, The Sum of Technologies. And this is really, I think, well, underrated, under the radar right now.
It's funny that you mentioned this book, and the next year I'm actually going to do a book club on the Summa Technologicae, the Sum of Technologies, because it is an insane book, but it's also incredibly insightful, despite being kind of nuts.
Yeah. I remember when I put it on audiobook, and I had like my friend co-founder nearby. He says, I can't listen to this bullshit. And I'm like saying, this is one of the greatest like books, sci-fi books, not even sci-fi, you know, it's not just stories. It's crazy theory coming off the head of the person who lived many, many years ago. And what he wrote about is not even happening yet.
Yeah, it's wild what that book gets right, and what, I mean, there's stuff it doesn't, but it is wild what that book foresees, and I think it is incredibly underread. So I really appreciate you bringing it up, because I am one of these people who's weirdly obsessed with that book, and I realized, like, yeah, it's partly nuts, but it's interesting. And your point about biology, how do I say this? Because of its use in racial ideology and the history of the 19th and 20th centuries, I get why people are afraid of eugenics. And but uh, genetic manipulation is something we've always done as humans, even we didn't realize it. And
You mean selection and things like that?
yeah, I mean selection. I mean, for example, just explaining to people when they talk about genetically modified food versus non-genetically modified food. And I'm like, okay, I get that there's a problem with information. I get that Monsanto, for example, in specific, pulls a lot of bullshit. I am with you on that. But my friend, everything you eat's been genetically modified through selective breeding, and most of the animals that you interact with have also been selectively modified by human intervention. And I don't know what else to tell you. Even showing you what like watermelon looked like from a painting in the 15th century, you're not going to recognize it.
Oh my god. Do you know that carrots were different color as well? Something like that I heard about. There were different colors of carrots, and for some reason now they're all orange, red.
Right. Yeah, apparently it was like the 15th or 16th century before we had like predominantly orange carrots. Before that, they were white, purple, and yellow, which you can still get. I mean, and like some of these things have been reengineered. But yeah, I mean, our images of major foods have just are basically from the last 200 years, and we just assume that it's always been that way.
I hate cherry tomatoes. It shouldn't exist.
Fair enough. I hate what I like to call the red globes of sadness that have been engineered in America for mass production by the they have lost most of their flavor at this point. They're engineered that way for packing consistency. And so but I just, when I talk to anybody who's a gardener, I'm just like, yeah, we genetically modify stuff all the time. I mean, we just do it slowly. So I just want people to think about that, or and gene editing. I mean, for example, when people talk about we don't have a cure for cancer, cancer is a complicated phenomenon that has almost infinite genetic mutations. But if you're gonna have a cure for cancers, it would be through individual gene editing.
Very customized. Yeah, exactly. This is true, because cancer is one word, but there are endless types of it, right? You can't do it all with one pill.
Yeah, or one very unfortunate way of fighting fire with fire that we tend to do. And so I do think we need to look at all the genetic stuff that's going on right now with CRISPR.
I'm really waiting for if we talk about the merge of tech and biology, I'm really waiting for these micro robots that could go through our blood vessels and heal us. You don't even need to genetically engineer yourself. Just let them be there, So it would be awesome.
Yeah, it would be awesome. And interestingly, I heard a lot more talk about that 10 years ago than I hear today. And I don't think it's because of technical reasons or lack of technical development. I think it's
probably because of the noise
right
that we have right now compared to 10 years ago. It was so clear,
Right. Yeah. Where can people find your work, Victor?
Where can people find me? Well, people can find me in any of the Humanode chats and channels. Always in the community. And I sometimes shit post on Twitter. My Twitter is tech_mingler. Don't ask me why, because I have a different nickname and I was banned on Twitter for a AI generated picture that I put on the back of it. And for the algorithms thought that it was something not safe for work. It was just AI generated gibberish, nothing else.
That's funny. All right. Well, thank you so much, Victor, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Derick. It was awesome. I love going to non-crypto podcasts so much. It's so interesting. Yeah. Have a good day, man.
You too. Bye.